Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a season in life when the footsteps of a chosen woman echo in the quiet places. She walks alone, not because she is unloved, not because she is forgotten, but because she has been set apart for something greater. The weight of divine purpose is rarely shared in its infancy. When God calls a woman, he often calls her into isolation before he elevates her into influence. People see the crown. They don't see the crushing that came before it. A chosen woman walks alone because she carries revelation others can't yet understand. She walks alone because her destiny demands focus, consecration, and courage. She walks alone because the noise of the crowd can drown out the whisper of God. You see, when God marks you, he separates you. And separation always feels like loneliness until his plan unfolds. It is in the quiet, in the solitude. The chosen woman learns to hear his voice clearly, trust him deeply, and prepare for the weight of the promise. So, if you find yourself in a season of solitude, don't curse it. Don't despise it. That lonely road is the birthing ground for greatness. God is shaping you, pruning you, and preparing you for a stage you haven't even seen yet. The chosen woman walks alone because destiny demands it. There is a principle woven throughout the pages of Scripture, a divine pattern you cannot escape. Before every elevation, there is always separation. Before the crown, there is always the cross. Before the palace, there is always the pit. Before the triumph, there is always the trial. God will often pull you away before he lifts you up because what he is about to do in your life requires preparation, consecration, and transformation. Here's the truth that many people struggle with: separation is not punishment, it is preparation. When God marks you for something great, when he has set his eyes on you for a divine assignment, he will begin to cut away the distractions, silence the noise, sometimes even disconnect you from people, places, and things you thought you couldn't live without. Some of you have been praying for promotion, doors to open, for opportunities to come flooding in, but you haven't understood that the very season of loneliness and quiet you're in right now is the answer to your prayer. God heard you. God is working. But he knows he can't take you higher until he takes you deeper. Before he gives you influence, he gives you isolation. Before he places you on a platform, he places you in the shadows. Because the higher he takes you, the stronger your foundation has to be. And foundations are always laid in private, never in public. Think about Joseph. This young man had a dream from God, a dream so big it made his brothers jealous and his father ponder what it could mean. But what happened after the dream? He was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, lied on by Potiphar's wife, forgotten in prison. Year after year, he walked a road of separation before he ever wore the robe of elevation. Why didn't God take Joseph straight from the dream to the palace? The palace requires a different version of you than the one who first received the dream. The palace requires maturity. It requires humility, requires resilience. You can't be thin-skinned in the palace. You can't be arrogant in the palace. You can't be spiritually weak in the palace. So God, in his infinite wisdom, will take you through seasons that feel lonely, seasons that feel confusing, seasons that break your heart. But all the while, he is shaping you into someone who can carry the weight of the blessing without crumbling under its pressure. Separation is where you learn to depend on God and God alone. Because when you're surrounded by people, when everything is going right, doors are flying open left and right, it's easy to lean on human affirmation. It's easy to draw strength from applause and approval. When God pulls you away, when the phone stops ringing, when the opportunities dry up, when the people you thought would always be there walk away, that's when you discover that he really is your source. Separation hurts. Let's be real about that. It doesn't feel good when relationships fall apart. It doesn't feel good when doors slam shut. It doesn't feel good when the crowd you used to run with suddenly doesn't fit you anymore. It feels like rejection, but in reality, it's redirection. God is not rejecting you. He is protecting you from people who can't handle the next level of your life, protecting you from environments that would poison your purpose. protecting you from opportunities that look good now but would sabotage your destiny later. Some of you are trying to drag people into your future who are only qualified for your past. That's why the separation hurts so much. You keep trying to hold on to what God is trying to cut off. But hear me, every time you refuse to let go of what God is pruning, you delay the elevation He is preparing. Look at Jesus. Before He launched His public ministry, He spent 40 days alone in the wilderness. No crowds, no disciples, no miracles, just Him, His Father, and the enemy whispering in His ear. Wilderness was separation before elevation. It was there that His identity was solidified, His obedience was tested, and His power was prepared. Even David, before he was king, he was a shepherd boy on the backside of a field, forgotten by his own father when the prophet Samuel came to anoint the next king. Alone with nothing but sheep and a slingshot, it was in that hidden place that David learned to worship. It was in that hidden place that he killed the lion and the bear. So when he stood before Goliath, he wasn't afraid. Why? Because the separation had already prepared him for the elevation. Separation comes before elevation because God refuses to give you a blessing you're not prepared to handle. He refuses to give you influence that will crush you because your character isn't ready. He refuses to open doors that your spiritual maturity can't sustain. So instead of fighting the separation, embrace it. Instead of complaining about the loneliness, use it. Press into prayer like never before. Develop the disciplines, the character, the faith muscles you're going to need when the platform comes. Because when God finally elevates you, there will be no time to prepare. You'll have to be ready. And when He does elevate you, when the doors swing open, when the influence comes, when the opportunities flood in, you'll be able to handle it with grace, with humility, with wisdom. Because the separation shaped you for the spotlight. The wilderness prepared you for the throne. The loneliness taught you to stand on a stage where everyone sees you, but you still hear only Him. Separation is not forever. It is a season, a divine classroom where God teaches you what the crowd never could. And when the season shifts, when elevation comes, you will look back on the loneliness, the tears, the prayers in the midnight hour, and you will thank God He loved you enough to prepare you before He promoted you. Purpose sounds beautiful when we talk about it, doesn't it? We shout about it. We post quotes about it. We declare, I'm walking in my purpose, like it's all sunshine and applause. But what they don't tell you is this purpose carries weight. Real purpose is heavy. It will press on your shoulders, stretch your faith, test your courage, and sometimes break your heart before it ever blesses your life. Because purpose isn't just about where you're going. It's about what you must carry to get there. Every person God calls to something great must first learn to carry the weight that comes with it. You cannot step into divine destiny with weak shoulders. Purpose requires strength, and strength is only built through pressure. Look at Moses, called to lead a nation out of slavery. The same man who stuttered, the same man who ran from Egypt after killing an Egyptian, the same man who told God, send someone else. But God wouldn't let him run because purpose isn't about convenience, it's about calling. Leading millions of people through a desert wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy. There were complaints, there was rebellion, there was hunger, thirst, enemies surrounding them. Moses carried the weight of people's expectations, people's needs, people's attitudes, all because God chose him for something bigger than himself. See, we love the idea of being chosen until we realize the cost of being chosen. We want the promise, but we don't want the pressure. We want the stage. We don't want the struggle. We want the blessing, but we don't want the burden that comes with it. The higher a building goes, the deeper its foundation must be. Because the taller it stands, the heavier it becomes. That's why God allows the weight of purpose to press on you before He lifts you up, so your foundation won't crack under the blessing when it comes. Look at Joseph again. We talk about his dream, the palace, the second in command position in Egypt. But before all that, there was betrayal by his brothers, slavery, false accusations, years in prison. That wasn't random suffering. That was preparation. The weight of purpose was shaping his character so he could handle the crown when it finally came. Imagine Joseph skipping the prison, skipping the betrayal, skipping the years of loneliness, and jumping straight into the palace. He would have been gifted but not grounded, talented but not tested. And untested people crumble under pressure because they have no endurance to carry the weight of responsibility. Purpose will always weigh you down before it lifts you up, because the thing God is trusting you with, whether it's a family to lead, a ministry to build, business to birth, a generation to impact, that thing carries spiritual weight. Lives depend on it. Legacies depend on it. Souls depend on it. That's why the process feels so heavy sometimes. It's not because God is punishing you. It's because He's strengthening you, preparing you, deepening you. Because weak shoulders can't carry a divine assignment. And can I tell you this? Purpose will also cost you comfort. The weight of purpose will pull you out of the crowd. It will wake you up in the middle of the night with ideas, with prayers, a challenge with burdens that nobody else around you understands. People will look at you and wonder why you don't fit in anymore, why you don't talk like you used to, why you don't go where you used to go. They won't get it because they weren't built to carry what you're carrying. Ask Nehemiah. He was just a cupbearer in the palace when he heard that the walls of Jerusalem were broken down. Nobody else around him seemed bothered. Life went on. People kept living, but Nehemiah couldn't shake it. He wept, he prayed, he fasted, until finally he left his comfortable position to rebuild a wall in a city most people had forgotten about. That's what purpose does. It keeps you up at night. It burdens you with things other people ignore. It makes you restless in places where you used to be satisfied. Because once purpose grabs you, you can't go back to normal. Ask Hannah in the Bible. Year after year, she prayed for a child while her husband's other wife mocked her. Pain pushed her into prayer so deep that God used her to birth Samuel, the prophet, who would anoint kings. Ask Mary, chosen to carry the Son of God, blessed among women, highly favored. But she also carried the pain of gossip, the risk of rejection, weight of raising a child who was God in the flesh, and then watching him die on a cross. Favor looks glamorous until you feel its weight. Some of you wonder why your life has been so hard, why the battles have been so intense, why the road has been so lonely. Because there is something on your life so significant that hell has been fighting you since day one. The enemy sees the weight of your assignment even when you don't. You'll stop resenting the process because you'll see how every tear, every battle, every lonely night prepared you for this moment. The weight didn't come to crush you. It came to shape you. It came to build the strength you didn't even know you had. So don't curse the weight of purpose. Don't run from it. Don't despise it. Embrace it. It teaches you. Let it mature you. Let it press you into God like never before. Because the heavier the purpose, greater the glory that will come when it's fulfilled. One of the greatest struggles in the life of a believer is not knowing if God speaks, but learning how to hear Him clearly. Because here's the truth, God is always speaking. The question is, are we listening? We live in a world full of noise, social media noise, news noise, the noise of opinions, the noise of worry and fear, the noise of our own doubts and insecurities. In the middle of all that noise, God speaks, not always with thunder and fire, not always with angels and trumpets, but often with a whisper so soft that if your soul isn't still, you will miss it. He had just called down fire from heaven on Mount Carmel, proving to everyone that the God of Israel was the true God. Yet right after this great victory, Elijah was running for his life, hiding in a cave, depressed and exhausted. And the Bible says there was a great wind. But God wasn't in the wind. There was an earthquake, but God wasn't in the earthquake. There was fire, but God wasn't in the fire. And after all that came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he covered his face because he knew this was God. That whisper teaches us something. God doesn't compete with the noise. He doesn't shout over our distractions. He doesn't scream over the chaos. He waits until our hearts are still enough to hear Him. And can I be real with you? Sometimes the loudest voice isn't the devil. Sometimes the loudest voice is your own. your own fear, your own impatience, your own plan for how you think life should go. Moses heard God in the wilderness through a burning bush. Samuel heard God as a young boy in the quiet of the night when he didn't even know it was God speaking yet. Jesus himself would often withdraw to lonely places to pray, away from the crowds, away from the noise, because even the Son of God modeled for us the power of stillness. When God speaks, chaos has to settle, confusion has to break. Fear has to bow, because the voice of God carries peace, even when it brings conviction. It carries clarity, even when it calls you to do something uncomfortable. Some people want a voice, but don't want the scriptures. Yet the Bible is God's voice in written form. If you never read what he already said, how will you recognize when he speaks again? You can't binge Netflix for 40 hours a week, scroll social media for 20 hours, fill your mind with everyone's opinions, and then give God 5 rushed minutes and wonder why his voice seems distant. Relationship takes time. Intimacy takes time. Learning to recognize his tone, his character, his ways, it takes time. Sometimes God speaks through his word, sometimes through prayer, sometimes through wise counsel, sometimes through circumstances, sometimes through a deep inner conviction that you can't explain but you can't ignore. See, we want God to send an angel in shining light to write on the wall, to send a prophet with our name and address. But most of the time, God speaks in ways that require faith to perceive. Because if you could see everything clearly right away, faith wouldn't be necessary. Obedience sharpens your hearing. The more you obey, even in small things, the more clearly you recognize his voice the next time. Because God speaks to followers, not just listeners. And let me tell you this, hearing God clearly doesn't mean you won't go through storms. Sometimes his voice will lead you right into a storm, like when Jesus told the disciples to cross the lake, and they ended up in a life-threatening storm in the middle of the night. And when you know his voice, you can walk through confusion with peace. You can stand in chaos with confidence. You can face decisions without fear, because you know the one guiding you never lies, never fails, and never leaves. Hearing God clearly isn't about special people with special gifts. It's about hungry hearts willing to be still, willing to listen, and willing to obey. When you learn to hear him above the noise, your life will never be the same. Promises are beautiful things. When God gives a promise, it stirs hope in your heart. It gives you something to cling to when life gets hard. It gives you vision when everything around you looks blurry. But what many people don't realize is this: between the promise spoken and the promise fulfilled, there is always a process of preparation. We love to shout about the promise. We love to write it down, declare it, put it on our walls and screensavers. We say things like, God is about to bless me. But what we often forget is that blessing comes with weight, with responsibility, with stewardship. Preparation is the only thing that makes you strong enough to carry it. Look at the children of Israel. God promised them a land flowing with milk and honey, land of abundance, freedom, and inheritance. But they didn't go from Egypt straight into the promised land. There was a wilderness in between. In Egypt, they were slaves. They thought like slaves. They lived like slaves. They saw themselves as slaves. God couldn't let them walk into a promised land with a slave mentality, or they would have ruined everything he was giving them. So the wilderness became a classroom. It was there they learned to depend on God for manna every morning. It was there they learned obedience when he told them not to gather more than they needed. It was there they learned his presence could guide them. Cloud by day, fire by night. Think about David. Anointed as king while he was just a shepherd boy. Oil poured on his head, a promise declared over his life. But he didn't walk into the palace the next day. He went back to the fields. He fought lions and bears in secret long before he fought Goliath in public. Preparation feels lonely. It feels frustrating. It feels like nothing is happening. You look around and think, God, didn't you say you were going to bless me? Didn't you say you had big plans for me? Why am I stuck here? Why isn't anything changing? When you ask for bigger blessings, God builds bigger character. When you ask for greater influence, he builds greater integrity. When you ask for more responsibility, he builds more discipline. It's like giving car keys to a 5-year-old. The promise of the car isn't the problem. child's maturity is. If they get the car too soon, the very thing meant to be a blessing will become a danger. That's why some doors haven't opened yet. That's why some opportunities are taking longer than you thought. It's not that God forgot. It's not that he changed his mind. It's that he loves you too much to give you something before you're ready to handle it. In Potiphar's house, Joseph learned administration. In prison, he learned stewardship and interpretation. By the time he stood before Pharaoh, he wasn't just a dreamer anymore. He was a leader, a man who could manage a famine, handle wealth, and save nations. Because he knows sudden success without preparation will crush you. The spotlight that comes too soon will expose every crack in your foundation. And God loves you too much to let the weight of the blessing destroy you because you skipped the process. Because every delay is doing something in you. Every closed door is shaping something in you. Every lonely night, every hidden season, prayer that feels unanswered is God preparing you for something bigger than you can imagine. The wilderness makes sense when you reach the promised land. Tears make sense when the blessing finally comes. The waiting makes sense when you see the lives impacted by your obedience. Preparation seasons don't last forever. They are divine appointments disguised as delays. They are God's way of making sure the blessing doesn't just come to you, it flows through you to bless others. There comes a point in every life when the path gets quiet, when the phone stops ringing, when the people who used to walk with you don't walk with you anymore. The crowd that used to cheer is nowhere to be found. The enemy loves to lie to you in lonely places. He'll whisper, nobody sees you. Nobody cares. Nothing will ever change. But God uses those very same lonely places to shape you, to mold you, to teach you to lean on him like never before. Look at Jesus. Before the cross, before the resurrection, before the church was born, he walked through the Garden of Gethsemane alone. His closest disciples couldn't stay awake to pray with him. The men who promised they would never leave him fell asleep in his most desperate hour. That's what purpose does. It pulls you into places where it's just you and God, where you surrender your will, your plan, your comfort, because the weight of destiny is too great to be carried with divided loyalty. Because sometimes God uses loneliness to prune relationships that can't go where you're going, to remove crutches you've been leaning on so you can learn to stand on his word alone, to silence voices that have been louder than his voice in your life. See, when you're surrounded by people, it's easy to lean on their faith, their prayers, their encouragement. But when God calls you higher, there will be seasons where he removes the crowd so you learn to lean on him alone. When you finally step into what God has called you to do, when lives start changing, when people are healed, when souls are saved, when destinies are shifted, you look back on the lonely nights, the tearful prayers, the seasons of silence, and you realize none of it was wasted. The loneliness taught you to hear God clearly. The loneliness taught you to trust him deeply. The loneliness taught you to walk by faith when nothing made sense. Purpose will make sense of the pain. It will bring beauty out of the ashes. It will turn the nights of weeping into mornings of joy. But you have to hold on. You have to outlast the loneliness. You have to remember that this season is temporary, but what God is building in you will echo into eternity. So don't give up in the quiet place. Don't quit in the lonely place. Don't let the enemy convince you this is the end of your story, because the same God who met Moses in the desert, who met David in the caves, who met Paul in the prison, who met Jesus in the garden, that same God will meet you right where you are.